Good morning and welcome to this remote meeting of the Council's Standards Panel. I am Elaine Roberts, Committee Officer, and I will begin the hearing with Agenda Item 1, the appointment of the Chair. Councillors, can I have a nomination, please, for Chair of this hearing? Councillor Berman, thank you. And can I have a seconder?
Yeah, seconded by Councillor Phil Davis.
Thank you very much.
Oh,
Can I just have Councillor Berman? Can you just Can I have a nomination, please? Just to clarify.
I'm sorry,
I think your sound wasn't on for a second. Sorry, Councillor Berman.
Yeah.
If you could say your nomination now.
Yes, I'm happy to propose that Councillor Robinson is the chair for this panel.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much.
I was a bit slow with the button.
Not at all. That's great. So we have a proposer of Councillor Robinson and a seconder. Thank you very much. I will now hand over to the chair for the hearing, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Elaine. Good morning and welcome everyone to this remote meeting of the Council's Standard Panel, where we'll be hearing submissions from the relevant parties before determining whether Councillor Gauntlet failed to comply with Lewes District Council's Code of Conduct for members. My name is Councillor Christine Robinson, and can I now ask for formal introductions, starting with my fellow councillors? You could please just say your name.
Good morning, Chair. My name is Roy Berman. Councillor Roy Berman.
Thank you.
Good morning, Councillor Phil Davis.
Thank you. The subject matter, Councillor Gauntlet, if you could just identify yourself.
Hello, good morning, Councillor Stephen Gauntlet.
Thank you, Councillor Gauntlet. The complainant, Miss Karen Rigby-Foe, if you could just introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Karen Rigby-Foe.
Thank you very much. And I'd just like to point that Steve Saunders is here, is present to support, excuse me, Miss Rigby-Foe. Steve, if you'd just like to indicate yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Steve Saunders. I'm here as advocate and support for Karen Rigby-Foe. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next one is the independent person, Mr. Neil Robinson. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Good morning, Neil Robinson, the independent person.
Thank you. The external investigator, Mr. Alex Oram.
Hi all, yeah, my name's Alex Oram. I'll be presenting the report today, and I have my colleague Mark, who did much of the evidence gathering, on hand if necessary as well. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. And the officers that are assisting today are the monitoring officer, Oliver Dixon.
Yes, good morning, Chair. My name's Oliver Dixon. I'm the monitoring officer for Lewes District Council.
Thank you very much. And Deputy Simon Russell, Deputy Monitoring Officer.
Good morning, Chair. Simon Russell, and I'm the Deputy Monitoring Officer for Lewes District Council.
That's great. Thank you all. I would like to remind all those attending that this is a public hearing through Microsoft Teams, and a live stream is being broadcast through the Council's website on YouTube. Please can I ask everyone to mute their microphones when they're not speaking, and if you could please ensure that your phones are on silent or switched off, please, that would be appreciated. If there are any connectivity issues, we will adjourn the hearing while we attempt to resolve them. Please can all councils, officers and participants clearly state their name each time they speak, so that it's clear to the members of the public who are listening who is speaking. Can you also please indicate when you have finished making your contributions so that I can move on? To clarify, when the hearing, excuse me, if any panel members or officers wish to speak, please use the raised hand icon on Teams. The complainant and the subject member will have an opportunity to speak at the appropriate point in the proceedings. To clarify, when the hearing is complete, the panel will adjourn for deliberation, and at that point, the public meeting will conclude. The decision of the panel will be announced publicly later today on the Council's website. The timing of that broadcast will be confirmed and published later today. To find that information from the homepage of the Council's website, viewers can select the Councillors and Committees option from the top right-hand menu icon and then select Calendar of Meetings. The calendar has a link to a page with full details of this meeting. The timing of the afternoon session will be posted on that page as soon as possible. Alternatively, you can email committee@lewis-eastbourne.gov.uk for further information. Before we begin, I will explain the roles of those officiating at the hearing. First, number one, the role of the Standards panel, consisting as myself, Councillor Robinson as chair, along with Councillors Davis and Berman, is to hear submissions from the investigating officer, Alex Oram of CH&I Associates, as well as from the complainant, Miss Karen Rigby-Foe, and the subject member, Councillor Stephen Gauntlet. 2, having regard to these submissions, together with the investigating officer's written report, we will then deliberate in private to decide A, whether Councillor Gauntlet failed to comply with Lewis District Council's Code of Conduct for members, and B, if there was a failure, what sanction, if any, to impose or recommend. And thirdly, the role of the independent person, Neil Robinson, is to provide his views to the panel on whether Councillor Gauntlet failed to comply with the code. The panel must take his views into account before reaching their decision. The independent person himself does not vote on the matter. The final decision rests solely with the panel. If the panel decides that a failure did occur, the panel will consult the independent person before deciding whether to apply or recommend a sanction. The monitoring officer, Oliver Dixon, and deputy monitoring officer, Simon Russell, are here to provide independent advice to the panel on matters of law and procedure. They will not express any views on the evidence heard or seek to influence the panel's decision. And finally, the committee officer, Elaine Roberts, will take the minutes. I will now take agenda items 2 and 3 together, apologies and declarations of interest. As all panel members are present, there have been no apologies for absence. I will ask the panel members to declare any personal interest in matters on the agenda, the nature of any interest, and whether they regard the interest as prejudicial under the terms of the Code of Conduct. Councillor Berman, do you have anything to declare?
Councillor Berman, I have attended meetings of the Green Havens, but I don't think it's prejudicial.
Thank you. Can I just check with that with the monitoring officer?
Yes, mere attendance at the Green Havens Committee does not amount to a prejudicial interest. There's no requirement for Councillor Berman to absent himself from any part of this hearing.
Thank you. And Councillor Davis?
Councillor Phil Davis, I have no personal interest to declare on this agenda.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. And myself as chair, I have no interest to declare either. So thank you, everybody. Item 4, agenda item 4, hearing in relation to allegations that Councillor Stephen Gauntlet failed to comply with the Council's Code of Conduct for members. Please, can I ask the monitoring officer, Oliver Dixon, to introduce his report to the panel, which is at page 3 of the agenda pack. Thank you, Oliver.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Oliver Dixon, monitoring officer. Our report sets out the context and the process for today's hearing, and I'll use this opportunity simply to highlight the main points. Today's proceedings adhere to the ethical standards provisions in the Localism Act, supplemented by the Council's local arrangements for dealing with complaints about councillor conduct. Last June, the monitoring officer received a written complaint from Karen Rigby-Foe, alleging that Councillor Gauntlet had failed to comply with the Council's Code of Conduct for members. Among other issues, she alleged that Councillor Gauntlet had used his position as a councillor, specifically as chair of the council, to improperly advantage himself and to disadvantage her. For ease of reference, a full copy of the Council's Code of Conduct is presented at Appendix 2 of the agenda pack. I and the monitoring officer at the time, Catherine Knight, decided, after consulting with the independent person, that the allegations engaged the code and were sufficiently serious to warrant formal investigation. We commissioned CH&I Associates, an external organisation specialising in ethical standards matters, to conduct an independent investigation and to file a report. Due to the number of interviews to be carried out and the complexity of evidence, CH&I's investigation was conducted over several months. Both Miss Rigby-Foe and Councillor Gauntlet had the opportunity to comment on the draft report, and CH&I presented their final version to me in January this year. In brief, the investigation recommends that Councillor Gauntlet be found to have failed to comply with paragraph 6A of the Code of Conduct on the grounds of using his position as a councillor to improperly advantage himself and to disadvantage Miss Rigby-Foe, but that no other aspect of Miss Rigby-Foe's complaint be upheld. In accordance with our procedures, I convened a meeting of the Council's Standards Panel to hear the investigator's case and verbal submissions from Miss Rigby-Foe and Councillor Gauntlet. In addition to the investigator's report, Councillor Gauntlet requested that the panel have sight of his emails dated 3rd of April, 1st of May and 3rd of May 2020, which the investigator specifically references in reaching the view that Councillor Gauntlet failed to comply with the code. I agreed to this request, and copies of these emails and associated threads are presented at Appendices 3 to 5 of your agenda pack. The hearing today will follow the order of proceedings set out at Appendix 6 on pages 89 and 90, beginning with the investigator addressing the panel, followed by representations from Miss Rigby-Foe and Councillor Gauntlet. Mr. Oram of CH&I Associates will, in presenting his case, focus on the key points of their investigation and their findings. When the panel retires to consider the evidence heard, their decision must be based on Councillor Gauntlet's conduct in his capacity as a member of the Council and none other. If the panel determine that Councillor Gauntlet did fail to comply with the code, they will go on to decide if it would be appropriate to impose a sanction. In those circumstances, the range of sanctions available to the panel is set out in the hearings panel at page 95 of the agenda pack. Chair, that's all I wish to say by way of introduction. Unless you or the other members have any questions for me at this time, I invite you to proceed with the hearing. Thank you.
Do any of my council colleagues have any questions to ask of Oliver Dixon? Councillor Berman? Councillor Davis? No, thank you. We will move on. Thank you, Oliver, for that. We will now deal with items 2 to 7 on the order of proceedings in Appendix 6 of the Monitoring Officer's report set out on page 90 in the agenda pack. This begins with item 2, the Investigating Officer's presentation to the panel on his report and recommendations. Alex Oram, can I invite you to address the panel, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I hope that that all present have had the opportunity to read through the report, because obviously it is quite a lengthy document, and I don't think it's in anyone's interest for me to go through it in blow by blow, as it were. I think that any particular issues that anyone has can be addressed with questions perhaps afterwards. But I would obviously point into the report to the fact that we have initially on page 13 of the bundle set out the complaint that we were asked to investigate from Ms Rigby-Foe regarding the conduct of Councillor Gauntlet. And then we've gone on, I hope, to set out an accurate and reasonably easily understood account of what the relevant facts are in relation to the matters under consideration. And that's set out in our report in section 4. Now, much of the complaint made by Miss Rigby-Foe was focused on what she alleges to be Councillor Gauntlet's misuse of his role as chair of the Green Havens Committee and his failure to abide by the Green Havens Constitution. She alleged that Councillor Gauntlet failed to declare the necessary interests at their meetings, failed to consult with them properly over the lottery bid, sent malicious communications to network members that maligned her character, and used his position of chair of Green Havens to benefit other organisations with which he was involved, including the council. She alleged that he did this potentially to benefit his own political career. Now, our view on the facts is that Councillor Gauntlet's actions, the vast majority of his actions as chair of Green Havens, including the emails that he was sending only in that capacity, largely fall outside the scope of our considerations. We've set out in section 5, paragraphs 5.1 through to 5.13, our considerations about what acting in a councillor's capacity means for the code and which areas of Councillor Gauntlet's conduct we believe falls within scope. Now, that when the Localism Act was set up, it was specifically done so that members of local authorities could be active participants in external organisations without necessarily needing to involve their position as a councillor, even if everybody, of course, knows that that individual holds a position on the authority. We believe that even though relations between the council and Green Havens became more and more entwined during the events that we've described in the report, Councillor Green Havens' involvement was very much as chair of Green Havens. He was never given a formal role by the council to involve himself in the lottery bid or in matters relating to Green Havens. And so it would have been possible for him to continue to act, all his actions in relation to Green Havens, to have been in that capacity and not fall within the scope of this standards framework. In our view, though, Councillor Gauntlet brought his behaviour within the scope of the code on a number of occasions, usually by specifically referencing the fact that he was acting in his position as chair when sending particular emails that related to the lottery bid or Green Havens business, and indeed related to Miss Rigby-Foe and concerns he had about her conduct. I've set out in paragraph 5.3 those particular emails and occurrences where we believe Councillor Gauntlet's conduct does fall within the scope of the code, namely his email of the 28th of February, in which he indicated his willingness to effectively make a complaint about Miss Rigby-Foe's conduct to the council's contract manager and in turn to her employer, where on the 29th of February 2020, in an email to Miss Rigby-Foe, he indicated that the council intended on having formal discussions with her employers about her behaviour, where on the 11th of March, he actually met with Miss Rigby-Foe's employers to discuss these concerns and present evidence to them. On the 3rd of April and the 1st of May, when he sent emails to numerous parties regarding Miss Rigby-Foe. On the 27th of May, when he contacted the council's senior lawyer regarding looking for advice around a grant that had been awarded from his council's chair funds to Green Havens. On the 30th of May, when he emailed Councillor Boniface about matters relating to Green Havens, and on the 11th of June, when he again contacted the council's senior lawyer. Now, all these instances are found in the report, and I've referenced them in paragraph 5.13. So my comments next are all predicated on the panel obviously agreeing with me in relation to where the code can be applied or not. But obviously in their considerations, the panel are going to have to decide for themselves where they think Councillor Gauntlet was or was not acting in his official capacity, and apply their own considerations accordingly. So on those instances, if they believe that he wasn't, then my considerations are not relevant because the code cannot be applied. And similarly, if they think there are occasions where they feel Councillor Gauntlet was acting as a councillor and that I haven't referenced those incidents, I'm happy to discuss as a result whether I think they amount to a breach of the code or not during the course of this hearing. If we then turn to our application of the code in relation to those incidents, you will see on page it's 41 of my report, so apologies, I'll just find the page number for the bundle. It would be page 47 of the agenda pack. We felt it important to set out in a little bit more detail what we have as our test for the various paragraphs of the code that we believe are engaged in this complaint. So we've set out in this section how we define failure to treat others with respect, how we define bullying and harassment, and how we define a councillor improperly using their position. And it's against these objective tests that we've looked at Councillor Gauntlet's conduct. From paragraph 5.18 to 5.27, we set out our considerations into relation to whether this conduct amounted to a failure to treat Miss Rigby-Foe with respect, or that it represents conduct that demonstrates that Councillor Gauntlet bullied and harassed Mrs. Rigby-Foe. Now, obviously, Mrs. Rigby-Foe, during the course of the investigation, was very open and honest with us about both how the conduct of Councillor Gauntlet impacted on her at the time, and we very much appreciate her assistance throughout. Because of the comments I've already made, though, our considerations were limited to those emails and to those occurrences which we pointed to as occurring where the code can be applied. And in paragraph 5.20, we've briefly recapped the comments that we believe fall within the scope of the code. In the ensuing paragraphs, we set out our considerations about whether those comments amount to bullying behaviour or disrespectful behaviour. And whilst we've, I hope, expressed our understanding of the impact the overall conduct had on Miss Rigby-Foe, and how it was clear why she found Councillor Gauntlet's conduct upsetting, we didn't, on balance, feel that the conduct represented a breach of this aspect of the code, with our conclusion set out in 5.27. We then turned to matters relating to the declaration of interests and the managing of those conflicts of interests. And from 5.28 onwards, we set out our considerations with regards to interests. Obviously, in the first instance, we're mindful that the code only requires councillors to formally declare interests that they may have at meetings of the council that qualify under the definition of meetings. So it would be a meeting such as this, but it would not necessarily be a meeting that's held between councillors and external organisations such as Green Havens, meetings that aren't formally minuted by officers. It's defined in your code, and we saw no evidence that Councillor Gauntlet had discussed Green Havens business at a meeting where he would have been required to declare an interest as a councillor, and therefore we didn't uphold that aspect of the complaint. We also considered how Councillor Gauntlet managed these interests as a councillor with the various organisations with which he was working. Now, there are occasions, obviously, as we said, where we believe that Councillor Gauntlet brought his conduct within the scope of the code. But it's important to note that on those occasions where he was acting as a councillor, any judgment as to whether he was acting properly or improperly must be assessed against the public interests and not the best interests of the Green Havens network. Much of the allegations about Councillor Gauntlet's lack of managing these conflicts was that he was using his position as chair of Green Havens to benefit the council, and that their interests weren't aligned. Now, whilst I can understand the concern in the complaint, a councillor is not going to be ever found in breach of the code of conduct for putting the interests of the council first. And therefore, whilst there may be concerns within the Green Havens network about the way that Councillor Gauntlet was managing these interests, we did not believe that the conduct as demonstrated in the report represented a failure to put other interests, private interests, above those of the council, which is where the public interest is aligned when you're looking at code of conduct issues. So I hope that's been clearly set out. We then turn to the aspect of the code where we have recommended that Councillor Gauntlet failed to comply with the code of conduct. And that's in relation to the use or attempted use of his position as a member to improperly confer or secure for himself or any other person an advantage, or for others a disadvantage. Now, we set out at paragraph 5.36 our considerations about what improper use means, because obviously there would be little point in being a councillor if you did not ever secure an advantage for anybody else. Councillors are regularly called on to assist people and help people, and on occasion this can involve them causing others a disadvantage. As an example, with a planning application where a councillor has decided that they have a particular view that may not be aligned with the views of some of their constituents. They are entitled to hold that view and represent that view. So the key word here is whether the position of the councillor has been used improperly. Now, the first allegation in this regard that was made was that Councillor Gauntlet used his position improperly to secure a cabinet position. Ms Rigby-Foe alleged that Councillor Gauntlet had been specifically promised a position on the council's cabinet if the lottery bid was successful, and that his actions in trying to ensure that the lottery bid was successful, which, as set out in the report, states that meant him going against the interests of the Green Havens network members, was in order for him to achieve that position. Now, in our view, it would have been improper if there was evidence of a deal, such a deal being on the table. We've pointed out that Councillor Gauntlet may have hoped or expected a position had he, once he left his role as chair, and that people's activities in things like lottery bids and other organisations can assist their political careers, and that's perfectly normal. We didn't find evidence that there was a specific deal on the table, however, and so we didn't uphold that aspect. We did, though, find that as the dispute between Ms Rigby-Foe and Councillor Gauntlet intensified, and as the disagreements over whether, in particular, Green Havens Network should hold their annual general meeting to effectively elect a new committee and potentially a new chair should take place, Councillor Gauntlet did engage his role as a councillor to express concerns within the council to the contract manager and to her employer about Ms Rigby-Foe's actions. And we found he did this initially on the 28th of February, and that he subsequently did it in just 3rd of April and the 1st of May. Now, in our considerations in paragraphs 5.43, 5.44, we set out why on the first occasion we felt that this didn't represent an improper use of Councillor Gauntlet's position. At this time, Miss Rigby-Foe did have a formal role to play in the lottery bid, and that role was to assist the council in particular with their submission. And Councillor Gauntlet had concerns that Miss Rigby-Foe's actions were actually running contrary to that intent, and therefore we felt it was reasonable for him to bring those concerns to the attention of relevant parties, and to only the attention of those relevant parties. Subsequent to that, however, Miss Rigby-Foe's involvement with Green Havens was clearly set out as being as a volunteer. We believe that prior to that there was understandable confusion, but that subsequent to that all parties were clearly informed that her ongoing involvement was as a volunteer and had nothing to do with her employment by Verde or their contract with the council. Despite this, Councillor Gauntlet, stating himself that he's making this report as chair of the council, has reported concerns about Miss Rigby-Foe's conduct arising from the dispute that they were having, which we consider to be a private dispute within the Green Havens committee. And we felt that this was an improper use of his position, that he was trying to use his position as chair to influence these internal Green Havens matters, and that he should not have been doing so, and that his actions clearly caused Miss Rigby-Foe a disadvantage. We go on to set out at the end of our report, obviously, the fact that this included Councillor Gauntlet seeking advice on whether, as chair of the council, he could withdraw the money that had been donated from his fund to the Green Havens committee network. Now, it may be that members consider that Councillor Gauntlet had legitimate concerns about how that money may or may not be used, because obviously if he were replaced as chair or no longer involved in the Green Havens network, he would no longer have control over it. But he was given very clear advice that once the money has been donated, it is for the Green Havens committee to decide how it's spent. And yet, having received that advice, he engages with Miss Boniface and suggests that should the annual general meeting go ahead, and should a new committee be formed, he would look to withdraw that £1,000 from the committee. And in our view, that this threat to withdraw the money was an improper attempt to use his position to disadvantage the committee and to potentially advantage himself, because whilst he suggested that he had no intention of continuing as chair of Green Havens beyond his being chair of the council, it is clear that he was very keen to continue as chair up until that time, and ideally up until a time when the lottery bid had been successfully submitted. And so that's the presentation of our report to members, and I hope that, you know, what is quite a lengthy tale and a lot of information for members to take on board, and it's not particularly with regards capacity, given both Councillor Gauntlet's involvement in Green Havens and the council, and Miss Rigby-Foe's involvement in terms of the council and Green Havens. It's a very complicated situation to unpick. So I hope our report has assisted in that, and I would happily take any questions from members if they have any as a follow-up.
Thank you very much, Alex. I now invite questions from the panel to the investigating officer, and if you would like to ask a question, if you could please raise your hand icon and say your name at the start of the conversation. Thank you. No questions? Oh, Councillor Davis.
Yes, one question. There's an indication that Miss Rigby-Foe had a breakdown by her own admission. Did Miss Rigby-Foe continue to work after that breakdown? Do you have that information?
Yes, I mean, obviously, this may be a question you want to put to Miss Rigby-Foe when she has
Yes, possibly, yeah, but I didn't know whether you had that information.
Our understanding absolutely is that she did continue to work. Obviously, our considerations are not focused on Miss Rigby-Foe's conduct or how, you know, any concerns that have been expressed about how she fulfilled a role. But we've in the information that we received, we've seen no concerns particularly expressed about that, other than those set out in the report about the interaction she had with Councillor Gauntlet and certain other members.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Berman, do you have any questions?
Councillor Berman, thank you, Chair. No, only to say that I think Alex's report and his summary today have both been very clear, and it is complex, but I think he's made it accessible to us. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Alex, if I could just ask one question, please, if I may. Page 50 of your report, item 5.48. You've got a little number 21 at the end of that paragraph. Can I just have your guarantee that you're fully satisfied that Mr. Frost had no interest or had anything to play with the decision to remove Miss Rigby-Foe's post?
Obviously, it's a very difficult one, Councillor, because we understand that it was Mr. Frost's decision. We asked Mr. Frost the rationale, both the rationale for the decision and whether any of Councillor Gauntlet's actions had a direct impact or influence on that decision. And we have to accept Mr. Frost's response at face value without any other evidence that it did not.
Okay.
But obviously, hopefully members have got enough of the context around that to make their own considerations.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you. I will now invite the complainant, Miss Karen Rigby-Foe, to make her representation to the panel. You may refer to the investigator's report and presentation, but may not introduce new evidence or arguments, and you may speak for up to a maximum of 15 minutes. And if you feel that this has obviously been a very stressful time for you, if you feel that you're struggling in any way or you feel distressed, you just indicate and we'll just pause for a couple of minutes. Is that okay? And you need to unmute. Thank you.
I've prepared something, so I'll kind of be at an angle, if that's okay with everybody. Okay, so good morning. Firstly, I want to thank Neil and Chi Associates for their independent investigation report, where they do recommend that finding Councillor Gauntlet sought to improperly use his position as chair of the council to influence an internal dispute within the Green Havens network in a manner that advantaged him and disadvantaged me. I had emails which have been sent from his personal, not council email addresses, being admissible today. I'm sure that all other aspects of my complaint would have been upheld. I understand how difficult it must be for you to decide on sanctions for a fellow councillor in respect of the failure to uphold this code of conduct, and I hope my statement today highlights the serious consequences last year, and specifically this matter had on my health, career and family life. I'm grateful for the support of all my family, my friends and all the colleagues in the community organisations that I work with and have continued to support throughout this awful period. The cost to the taxpayer of the independent investigation of £8,000 and the cost of all the officers' time in this matter, which will be considerably more, is another sad impact of the proven actions of Councillor Gauntlet. The community groups that I support that are inspiring and determined to make their communities a better place to live and have used that money in so many more positive ways. As you've read in the report, I was employed as Community Liaison Officer at Burley's, which became Ida Birdies, and at times I was directed to use my paid employment hours to support Green Havens. Most of the time I dedicated to making connections and building a supporting umbrella network for groups and individuals to improve our green spaces and the environment as an unpaid volunteer. I supported over 100 community groups with over 3,000 individual members and could always be found at the grassroots community events as a volunteer. I took part in wildflowers, bulb and tree planting, animal and plant surveys, and I helped all those groups to attract new volunteers, provided open days, I gave presentations to widen their reach and attract funding for them. I myself brought in nearly £10,000 in grant funding and continue now to fundraise for great projects. Some of this included £2,600 from the House Project for the Green Havens website, banners, leaflets and speakers, £500 from local town councils, £250 from SCDA, £4,000 from Sussex Community Foundation, £1,000 from the Chair's Fund for Lewes District Council, £264 raised and donated by the Chief Exec of Lewes District Council. In September 2019, I began a £2.5 million lottery bid with the South Downs National Park for Green Havens, which was to develop into the Hughes Valley Cares lottery bid. As you can see from the report before you, things began to take a turn for the worse and relationships began a downward spiral. And Councillor Gauntlet's term as LDC chair was nearing its end, and coincidentally the lottery bid I'd worked really hard to develop and had successfully progressed through the initial stages, down from 16 sorry, it's hard, down from 640 applicants to the final 35. This was when Councillor Gauntlet became more and more inapproachable and less involved with the committee business of Green Havens. The committee tried to arrange an AGM, but he persistently refused. He cited what the committee considered feeble excuses for not doing so. Green Havens have become aware of a desire for SCDA to take over the running of open spaces with the district and, of course, the Hughes Valley Cares lottery funding bid, which had cleared many of the early hurdles and was well on its way to becoming a valid and potential successful bid. I myself was, like many working people at that time, furloughed by my employers, Ida Birdies. However, I continued to work with Green Havens in my own time to maintain the principles of the groups and help the communities during lockdown. I maintained its presence on social media platforms. I continued to publish information and ideas for all those people struggling with isolation during the pandemic. Whilst appearing reluctant to agree to a meeting on Green Havens Committee, Councillor Gauntlet openly explained his desire to step down as chair of that committee, citing his expectation that he was to become a cabinet member of the LDC. During this time, one member coincidentally resigned over her employment by SCDA and the personal and prejudicial interest she now had over the lottery bid. Councillor Leslie Boniface, a New Haven Lib Dem councillor and a deputy mayor for the town, as well as the chair of Riverside Park and Valley Ponds Group, was co-opted onto that committee and ensured it remained core. The remaining new members of the committee called that AGM in June 20. Councillor Gauntlet did not join the meeting despite being asked many times, so he was removed as chair in his absence and was replaced by Leslie Boniface. At that meeting, concerns were raised again at suggestions of the lottery bid being hijacked by SCDA and the hard work of all the committee members being lost to an organisation that had a reputation for doing similar with other local groups. And it was also during this tumultuous period that Councillor Gauntlet began to be particularly aggressive towards me. He was threatened to withdraw that grant funding he had made to Green Havens from his LDC chair fund, and he made accusations of my inappropriate behaviour to my employers. It was clear to me that he was trying to get me removed from my position as the CLO and in turn remove me from any dealings with the lottery bid. This would see his way clear to work with SCTA to complete the bid, and I think it's reasonable to assume would ensure his successful inclusion on LDC cabinet and even have open spaces within his portfolio. The investigation report, and as Neil has already referred to in his talk, found no evidence of any unpleasant behaviour from me, no emails of any bad attitude. There has been nothing submitted. And it's been proven by the report's conclusions that he used his position as councillor and chair of the district council to unduly influence those aims. He also sought the assistance of fellow councillors in the Cooperative Alliance, namely councillor members Julie Carr and Matthew Bird, to exacerbate this process, as well as the senior specialist advisor, open space and contract at the council, Andy Frost, who to approach Heidi Verdi and encourage them to make me redundant. To support that reasoning behind this request, it was explained that it was part of a wide-ranging cost-saving exercise in light of the pandemic. This appears strange on two fronts. Firstly, at the time of that dialogue between LDC and ID Verdi, the COVID-19 pandemic was only a few weeks old and any financial implications couldn't have been foreseen. Secondly, no other companies employed under contract by LDC or indeed have been asked to make similar roles within their organisations redundant to save money. In this regard, I did send a Freedom of Information request, and 7 months later, at the end of October, it was confirmed that still no cost savings had been identified. I did take my employer to a tribunal for unfair dismissal in October 20, and there was an out-of-court settlement agreed. Although that's gone some way to repairing the effect it's had, the wounds have left me regarding my mental well-being and my effects on my career have been irrevocably damaged. I have managed to secure employment, but after considerable soul searching and effort, I have too remained a hardworking Green Havens member and continue to still support and advise those community groups as a volunteer. I must ask the panel to recognise the overriding conclusions of the report and that Councillor Gauntlet is guilty of failing to comply with paragraph 6A of the Council's Code. Namely, he sought to improperly use his position as chair of the council to influence an internal dispute with Green Havens Network in a manner that advantaged him and disadvantaged me. His actions have not only brought him but the council into disrepute. He lost me a job that I loved and caused me severe mental stress and anguish at a time when the council should have been trying to retain staff and support the community it serves. Councillor Gauntlet, sorry.
Just take time, just deep breaths.
Sorry. Councillor Gauntlet chose to actively use his position and to have me removed. And in doing so, it helped further his standing and the ability for any other organisation to take over a substantial grant funding bid, which both Green Havens and myself had worked so hard to progress. A councillor should be in a trusted position in the community, which should demand respect and not be one that is abused in the way that Councillor Gauntlet has been allowed to do so. In conclusion, I thought it's only right that this panel, 1, insists that Mr. Gauntlet resigns from his position as councillor. 2, I ask that the current chair of Lewes District Council writes to me and makes an unreserved apology for the way I've been treated by one of its members. 3, Cabinet members Councillor Julie Carr and Matthew Bird, along with LDC officer Andy Frost, formally apologise for their involvement and complicity in the process which led to the move from my post. And 4, I asked Lewis District Council make a reasonable financial offer to me in recognition of their involvement, recognised by the investigators' report, which clearly states that Councillor Gauntlet used his position as Chair of Lewis District Council and properly influence the ongoing dispute over the future of Green Havens and the involvement in the lottery bid. I am grateful to the Council for agreeing to this investigation. It's been more than a few months. It's been a long time. And I thank the independent investigator for his report and findings. I thank all of you today for being part of this panel and assessing the report and giving me the time to hear from me in person. I trust that you had the courage to make the right decision and see that justice is done. Help me move on for what has been a terribly distressing period in my life. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rigby-Foe. Can I ask my fellow panel members if there is any questions they'd like to ask Ms. Rigby-Foe? If you could just, maybe she just takes a breather for a second. Councillor Davis? Thank you. Councillor Berman? No, thank you very much. Thank you, councillors. I will now invite the subject member, Councillor Gauntlet, to make his representation to the panel. You may refer to the investigator's report and representation, but may not introduce new evidence or arguments. You may speak for up to a maximum of 15 minutes. And again, if you feel that it's becoming too stressful or you need a break, you just indicate, please, Councillor Gauntlet. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just checking everything's on. Yes. I find it strange, rather sad and disappointing that we're here today. Frankly, it didn't need to be like this. The Green Havens Network, when founded in 2017, was intended to be a community of like-minded people with a special interest in the green spaces in and between Seaford and Saltdean. The then project manager at SCDA encouraged me as the newly appointed LDC chair to combine with them for mutual benefit to give tangible expression to my theme of office, which was to encourage and affirm nature conservation and biodiversity, especially with young people. Green Havens was and is a mutual support network with free of charge open meetings quarterly. It does not have a formal joining process. There are no forms to complete, no fees or annual renewals. It is a loose federation, not an entity. I would question any claim that Karen Rigby-Foe can represent the combined views of Green Havens. Indeed, over 20 members are now contributing to the lottery climate change bid, to which she was personally so opposed. Incidentally, as chair of Green Havens, I did not have access to the full membership directly. The email address list could only be accessed by Karen Rigby-Foe. Some brief background. It's more to do with Green Havens than me as a councillor, but it does provide its essential context. The complainant came to a Green Havens meeting early in 2018 and, according to the minutes, offered to help with administration. Now, I'd be the first to say that she then made a significant contribution, especially in her role as Community Liaison Officer for Burley's. 10% of her contracted time was allocated to Green Havens, but she actually did a very great deal more than that, which was much appreciated, especially that after an evening meeting, she had to go home to Hastings. However, as time went by, Green Havens seemed to assume new proportions and dimensions in her mind, which were much more corporate. than the original, deliberately rather informal purpose. In June 2019, Greenhavens held its first well-attended AGM, which was well organised by the complainant. Shortly afterwards, 2 of the able and willing original committee members resigned, and the circumstances and reasons they gave worried me. These were followed by 2 more early in 2020. I have over 40 years' experience in HR and occupational psychology. I am a Chartered Fellow of the Institute of Personnel and Development, and when resignations such as this happen in teams or departments, serious alarm bells ring. My regret is that because I was very busy during my 3rd time as LDC Chair, I gave less time than I would have wished as Chair of Greenhavens, especially to the 2019 resignations and their causes. So turning to the complaint, and 2020 in particular, I do not propose to dwell on the bulk of the narrative, especially as the external investigator has not upheld it, but simply to thank the investigator for managing to take such a complex set of circumstances and produce such a clear report. Instead, I will concentrate on the findings that I have disadvantaged the complainant, and especially on the 3 emails that gave rise to this. These documents demonstrate, to my mind, when read as complete threats, although only one of them is clearly from me in my capacity as a councillor, that I was responding to what I consider to be the complainant's disadvantaging of others. And that's especially true of the emails contained in Appendix 3. It's important to set these emails in the context of what else was going on during that first week of April. The COVID crisis had turned the world upside down, and I was at the heart of the local response in Seaford with the recently formed Seaford Volunteer Emergency Team. That very week was frenetic. I was responsible for setting up the finances and logistics for teams of shoppers delivering supplies to people isolating. This meant moving in uncharted territory, complex negotiations with the supermarket HQ for vouchers, sourcing card readers to take payments on the doorstep, and managing the various set-up interest-free loans and the accounting processes. This meant very long days and weekends for all of us. I could not afford more than the minimum of time for anything. It was like running a battle. That same week was also the deadline for the submission of the National Lottery bid, authored by Emma Allen from the Park. And I wrote what you see in the email of the 3rd of April to try and prevent the bid and the hard work of 9 other partners and those from the Greenhavens network who had independently contacted me to emphasise that they did want to be included in this bid. I did it to prevent the bid from capsizing. Those copied on that email were the direct decision makers for the lottery climate change bid submission. I acknowledge that paragraph 5.48 shows that my mind had not adjusted from seeing the complainant as an employee of ID Verdi to that of being a volunteer. I wasn't even sure at that time whether the rules of furlough allowed it. But what I wrote was done in good faith and in what I believed to be for the benefit of the wider community. I wrote as chair of LDC because that office includes a remit to be first citizen of the district with specific reference to encouraging community development. And within community development, it goes on to say, and communities of interests. With 9 partner organisations from across the district, this bid was a perfect example of fulfilling that. Had I not done so, it is very likely that a development bid of this quality and potential future high value would have failed. Moving to Appendix 4, can I just say this was sent from my personal email. I don't see how this was done in my councillor role. The Help Shape Our Future, Join Our New Team document, which was internal to Greenhavens, was sent out under the names Karen and Lizzie, no surnames, just Greenhavens volunteers, felt to me and others to be a takeover or coup of Greenhavens. I only found out it had been sent by telephone calls from Greenhavens members to me later on in the day. This action disadvantaged not just my credibility as chair of Greenhavens, but the integrity of the governance of Greenhavens at that time. Appendix 5 contains personal email exchanges between me and Leslie Boniface, certainly only in my role of Greenhavens, and I was well aware that she was potentially the incoming chair of Greenhavens. I thought they were private exchanges, although in the original complaint, extracts are reproduced with the title Stephen Gauntlet to a community group. How did this email get into the report? Was it supplied by the individual who prompted the correspondence? So in my mind, it calls into question its admissibility as evidence, but there is a sense in which the exchange is very important because my email refers to the complainant's rewriting of the Greenhavens Constitution without any reference to me as a committee member and chair, and it has a bearing on the comments concerning funding provided from the LDC Chair's discretionary fund. That rewrite, which was to go to the next full AGM of Greenhavens, included explicitly removing local authorities from the list of stakeholders of Greenhavens. To my mind, that's a bit like waking up in the morning and deciding to saw a leg off your dining room table. Incidentally, after the Greenhavens AGM, the local authorities were reinserted into the new constitution, and all funding documents, finances, etc. handed over fully to Greenhavens by me. So in closing, as many will know, against all odds, the National Lottery Climate Change Development bid was successful, and I'm happy to say that over 20 groups that are identified as originally part of Greenhavens network are engaged in the development phase towards a major follow-up bid in 2022 to deliver innovative climate change mitigation outcomes, potentially funded to the value of over 2 million within the Ouse Valley. As you may imagine, hard work was necessary to rebuild credibility with the National Lottery. Therefore, I find it hard to grasp what I have done to disadvantage the community of Lewis District. I don't believe that these emails, only one of which was written in my capacity as a councillor, advantage me personally or as a councillor. Although it could be argued, in passing, that my credibility as the then chair of Greenhavens had been disadvantaged. When you make your deliberations, may I ask that you take into account the following: intention matters, context matters, and facts matter. Thank you very much.
Apologies. Thank you, Councillor Gauntlet. Members of the panel, I will just say one thing. Miss Rigby-Foe, unfortunately, you put your hand up. You can't ask any questions of the subject member.
No, I don't seem to be able to message anybody. I was trying to message Elaine because Mr. Gauntlet's brought in information that's not in the report, and I thought it had been made clear to both of us that we can't do that.
I would take advice on that. Thank you. Oliver?
Could Karen just clarify which information she's referring to, please?
So the end of in his conclusion, he's bringing in information that's happened subsequently regarding the lottery bid. I would have had a lot more to say about that, but I've stuck to the report and sorry, bad timing that was. Can we just give me a couple of minutes because my dog's going to go berserk, if that's okay? Sorry, that's the joys of doing this.
Karen, you've muted again.
And in the beginning of Councillor Gauntlet's statement, he suggests going back to 2018 and the creation of green havens and so forth. And I don't believe that should be admissible today because, again, I would have had a lot more to say about that. And it's not in the report. The report has very much stuck to the break of code of conduct. But is there a way that I should be able to message Elaine so that I can not have to put my hand up in future? Or I don't seem to have a chat or anything.
Elaine, would you like to come in on that?
Yes, I can. I'll bring up my email. I haven't had a text from you, Miss Rigby-Foe. I've texted you, but I haven't had anything from you from that race. But I can bring up my email if that's easier.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Rigby-Foe. My fellow councillors, are there any questions you'd like to ask Ms Rigby-Foe? Councillor Davis? Councillor Berman? Thank you. Okay, we are coming to the conclusion of the first part of the meeting. I just want to ask panel members if there's any further questions, if you want to check any more facts, if you need clarifications on anything from the investigating officer, the complainant, or the subject member. Are there any further? This is your, thank you, Councillor Berman.
Yes, I just wanted to be clear, in particular, in understanding the last comments from the complainant. Is it reasonable for us to consider the context in which all these actions was happening in our deliberations?
What does that mean? What do you mean, Councillor Roy Berman?
Well, I was asking the officer who's responsible for the proper running of this, whether we are entitled or proper to look at not just the textual complaints, but the environment in which they were made and the general situation at the time. So that's really for Mr. Oliver Dixon, I think. Chair.
Thank you. Oliver, would you wish to respond?
Well, if as a panel you consider that the contextual information helps to inform your decision about whether Councillor Gauntlet's conduct was proper or not, then yes, you know, you're being invited to consider whether he used his position as councillor properly or improperly. Context will have a bearing on that, inevitably. And but I think CH&I's investigation sets out the context very thoroughly. I mean, I can see Alex wanted to come in there, but I think context is a factor for sure.
I thought so. I just wanted to double check it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Berman. Alex, would you like to just say something?
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say that we normally suggest to members absolutely context is relevant, and where it is most relevant is in considering what should happen next. I think that there are very fixed rules around in terms of the code and how members can use their position. And once a decision has been made on that, members can consider the mitigating and aggravating factors that surround the conduct that they found. Are there mitigating circumstances that explain why these actions were taken? Or indeed, are there aggravating factors that make the conduct that has occurred seem even more serious and regarding even greater sanctions. So that was my only contribution. That obviously we members are going to have to consider whether his position was used improperly in the first instance, and then they can focus on context perhaps when they're considering what should happen about it.
Thank you, Chair. That satisfies my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That now concludes the first part of the hearing. The panel will now retire to consider the matter. Once we have reached our decision, the hearing will reconvene and the panel will announce the decision as to whether or not, in respect of the allegation, the subject member failed to comply with the Council Code of Conduct for members. If it is found there is a failure, the subject member will be invited to make representation as to any sanction the panel might impose, i.e. any mitigating factors he may wish the panel to take into account. The subject member may speak up to 5 minutes on this. This stage of the hearing is only between the subject member and the standards panel. The complainant and her support person will be redirected to the public stream for this stage where they're able to view proceedings. The time of that stage of the hearing to announce our decision will be published on our website later today. And once again, the meeting will be publicly streamed on YouTube. Please contact by email committees@lewis-eastbourne.gov.uk or refer to our website for further information. The relevant information page can be found by visiting the home page of the Council's website, where viewers can select the Council's committee option from the top right-hand menu icon, and then select calendars of meetings. The calendar has a link to a page with full details of today's standards panel meeting. The timing of the afternoon session will be posted on that page. Thank you all for attending this morning.